And I'm very excited to host Kat Dovjenko. She's the creative design director at Muse and Company. I must say, Kat has been the most awaited guest in my show. A lot of people mention about Kat, and I wanted to get her on the show. And also, few things I like about is Kat did bachelor's in field other than architecture, and me too. So she brings a very unique approach, and she's very active in Web3 ecosystem. So I'm part of CityDAO. Kat has a CityDAO citizenship. I'm very much in see all the content of Cabin DAO. She is very active in it, and she keeps on posting interesting Web3 projects all the time. So I can't wait to know all the journey about cats. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Mayur. I'm really excited.
Awesome. So my first question is, uh, you, what, how has your perspective about AEC evolved before you enter the field, after you entered the field, and now?
Yeah, wow. Let's start out with a big one. Um, so I think we should probably start with before. Um, and before, I actually had no idea. Like many people, I thought that it was pretty simple. I had a very simplified view of the world. As you mentioned briefly, I did a bachelor in finance, so had a very kind of investment banking view of the world where um, or investment banking slash like management consulting view of the world where I was like, well, it's just three problems. We need to solve problem one, problem two, problem three. And then when I started to get into it, like many problems, there's kind of, that meme where you have a simple, complex, simple. So at first I didn't know anything about AUC. And so I thought the problem, like the solutions were relatively simple, and then realized that they're far more complex. And I think I'm just coming out of it being like, oh, it's just a few things that we need to do. So um, it was, I think in architecture school, it was a lot about design and architecture. And then now coming out of it, realizing that design is like a consequence of a deeper systemic thing is probably how I see it now. So it's all very interconnected, but all very needed and all very important right now, especially as we start to come into like some pretty big climate change problems.
Got it. So, and I remember you are also very active in Spatial Syndicate. So, was that
Mhm.
inspired from your background in finance that we got to start like a VC firm in AC? And
Yeah,
what are the things you look?
yeah. I think, over the past 2 years, there's actually been quite a bit of change with a lot of venture capital flowing into more hard tech or deep tech. So AC is sort of like a little bit like deep tech. It's not, it's definitely not defense or space tech. It's not that complex. But I think when we first started Spatial Syndicate, our hope was kind of twofold. We were looking to kind of promote interest from venture capital firms into startups that do AEC things. So more specifically into startups that were doing or that were disrupting old models. So whether that's kind of like bad software, so for example, like Autodesk, or models of construction. So we've had a few companies that do a lot of work within like getting construction to be a little bit more smooth. So when we first started, there wasn't as much interest. And I think over the past 6 months or so, you've gotten quite a bit of people that are either Katera or WeWork alumni starting to create these amazing different companies and startups. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that those kind of returns do end up being useful. They're not, SaaS company returns, but they are quite valid. And yeah, I think over the past 6 months, we've gotten, I think the the environment has changed a little bit. So anyway, so one of those was being kind of a promoter of AEC startups. And on the flip side, what I wanted to do was allow architects and people in the AEC business that don't always have a chance to invest into their own, so funding their own, so to speak. So one of the things we're
Mhm.
most proud of is actually the amount of people we brought into the AngelList platform. So that was something we did. We haven't had, we're not active every single day. We're pretty picky. We do turn down companies. We are very thoughtful with the amount of things we bring to our LPs. And so far, it's been really exciting. It's been a really good run. We funded some really good companies that we're excited about. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm very curious to know what are the areas in problem space in AEC tech which no one has addressed yet or which has a lot of potential.
Oh my gosh, we could spend like the next hour or two on that. Um, I mean, right off the bat, it's like productization of construction systems. So everyone's kind of been approaching it in different ways. There's prefabrication, there's Icon with 3D building. There's different ways we're thinking about how do we create product. So how do we reduce like the bespoke nature of construction? And in reality, it's almost like that saying where like the future's already here, but it's unevenly distributed. Like if you go into some of the Chinese companies, they are, they've productized a lot of their building in a ways that we don't even know yet, or like the ways that we haven't embraced yet, so to speak. So I think that's a big one. Productization is a huge one. I think like tools and software, obviously that one is near and dear to my heart. Having funded some of these companies that do um, think about ways to essentially stop architects and stop designers from whenever they open a file that they have kind of a blank blueprint, that they're more similar to how software is developed, and the fact that there are libraries and things you can plug in.
Mhm.
um, there's a lot of room there for growth, especially if it's tied with like the software is kind of like um, propelling the productization, and the productization is propelling the software. And I think there's a few things that I know about for sure is some of the things that are coming out with regards to like workplace changes. So I think there's probably a number of other things I'm not going to touch upon in terms of AEC technologies that
Mhm.
I don't know, but definitely tools, productization, and the third one, which is kind of more of a sector rather than a type, is workplace. And obviously, doing a ton of workplace stuff in the past with Google, seeing what are the changes within workplace. And I mean, Fed probably spoke about this in Canoa, where the entire industry is incredibly wasteful when it comes to workplace and furniture. And you've got a few big players there that aren't that great. So as we start to think about remote work in a very as we start to really
Mhm.
see the implications of remote work, whether that is a hybrid workplace or something else, just the fact that we're untying place and employment for some people, not for everyone. I think we haven't yet fully seen what that means, both in kind of the boring like workplace scale. Like, there's probably going to be new furniture that's going to be invented. There's probably going to be new typologies of workplace, but also kind of on a larger urban scale. And that's where things like decentralized cities get really interesting. Charter cities, new ways to build cities. I've just started to dive into that world, and I think it's really cool.
That's great. I think that's a good segue to what is your or aha moment or light bulb moment when you were exploring various technologies.
I mean, it depends on the technology. I think recently, and I'd be curious what you think about this one too. Recently, obviously, I've been a Kernel fellow, so I've learned a lot about, especially kind of like how cryptocurrencies can fund public goods, and like the context within crypto. So right now, obviously, there's a huge world of crypto. You have whole governments adopting Bitcoin. You have this big boom of NFTs and celebrities really going behind that. But a lot of that is kind of like the froth beneath something that's a little bit deeper. And the aha moment that I think is really interesting is probably 6 or 7 months ago, realizing that crypto isn't a currency. It's actually like a global coordination mechanism. And I've kind of been dabbling with Bitcoin and crypto since 2012, or when it's
Wow.
early days of Coinbase. And it was funny, a friend of mine sent me like $1 in Coinbase like in 2012 or 2014. And
No
now,
way.
and the reality is I was Canadian, so it wasn't acting in Canada at the time, so I couldn't access it. But I remember sitting in a cafe, and this is a friend of mine who basically kind of explained blockchain to me in this cafe, and I still remember kind of like exactly the cafe and where I was, and I thought to myself like, oh my god, this is so complicated. It's never going to work. It seems silly, and lo and behold, many years later, that we're into this really interesting new world. And so the aha moment really was realizing that two things. The first thing being that this was this kind of global coordination system, could be anyway, has the potential to be. And then the second thing was this realization that, when you put money or debt or coinage, like basically like currency, like basically these kind of concepts into context, one of the wildest things I realized was that it took about 400 years for us to move from gold coins to paper money. And most people, at least in the early days of coinage, didn't have gold coins. They were not operating under gold coins. Those were kind of people that were, seedy. Like there were people that were basically like warriors or people in the army that needed those gold coins because they didn't really have a place. And in the past, a lot of things were done kind of on a local, kind of like trusted credit system. Anyway, whole different ballgame there. But basically, one of the craziest things that I learned was that it took 400 years for us to move from one system to another. And everybody that's talking about Bitcoin and crypto and talking about how like essentially it has not yet come to be this big thing, really need to look at how slow the previous
Mhm.
change was, and realize that we're actually on this kind of very long trajectory towards something, and maybe towards something that is like a global coordination mechanism. And so that was one of the biggest kind of aha moments when I realized that it wasn't a currency, it wasn't really a language. It was this kind of idea of programmable money, but it was this idea of like programmable coordination, and that was something that I thought was really cool. And when you think about the world's problems today, things like climate change, and we'll probably find other global scale problems, but climate change is really the beginning of kind of a global scale problem that's beyond nations. And when you think about that level of problem, there needs to be kind of like a global coordination system to fight it. And so that's kind of this crazy thing that I've realized. And it really was kind of the impetus was probably some of the earlier NFT projects like Loot, where people were coordinating on their own, across borders and finding ways to incentivize themselves to coordinate. And that was kind of the beginning of something where I thought, oh, it's actually not money. It's this coordination mechanism.
Yeah, I was thinking like if we go deeper into like NFTs and this coordination, it's like the smart contracts with DAO governance with this cryptocurrency, like it develops this whole ecosystem, which is like a new way of like maybe we will coordinate in future. And I was thinking, what are some projects like you mentioned about loot and other things like which you are excited or bullish about?
Yeah. I've actually kind of stepped back a little bit on the like NFT, pure NFT stuff. I'm obviously quite bullish in the idea of like decentralized cities and charter cities. I'm bullish, but also being an architect, obviously you have this other level of context where you know that smart cities and these sort of cities have been thought of before, right? There's a book called Anathem, where it's basically kind of this really cool sci-fi like take on time and one of I don't go into too much detail because it would take like 4 hours. But one of the cool things is like there's this this monk order. So there's got these like kind of like group of monks, and there's this one monk order where basically their entire job is to tell everybody else that this idea has been thought of before. So like to remind people that this idea isn't new. And I feel sometimes as an architect that I have to remind people that, especially with regards to like cities being built up from scratch, these ideas aren't new. And in fact, there's like this tremendous context, and we can learn from kind of the faults and the benefits and the successes and the not so successes of these. So basically, I think, this is a long-winded way of me saying that I'm very interested in kind of this idea of new cities or new
Mhm.
countries. I'm pretty excited to see that recently Balaji just launched a new book, so I'm very excited to read that when it comes out. He's definitely someone that has a whole host of knowledge with regards to things like the sovereign individual, things like like this idea of building up countries or cities from scratch, and I'm cautiously bullish on or cautiously interested on that, but also kind of like knowing the context between things that haven't succeeded in the past, like Brasilia and all these other examples. Anyway, really excited about cities. So obviously, City DAO is one of those that I'm interested in. Cabin DAO is another one that I think is really you mentioned it right at the beginning. I think one thing that I really love about what John is doing is that his end goal is really to explore what a decentralized city might look like. And getting there, he's very thoughtful in the way he's structuring Cabin DAO in these kind of seasons. So right now, it's really about DAO operators or people that need a place to meet in real life and to collaborate in real life. And Cabin DAO provides that structure. But in the future, I don't know what else it could be, and that's something we're starting to realize because we don't fully know what, for example, a metaverse is. We don't fully know what a DAO could be. We don't fully know what a decentralized city could be. So, city DAO, obviously, Cabin DAO, they're great operators, and I think in terms of NFTs per se, I'm quite interested in sort of like what Yuga Labs is going to be doing. Like, I mean, this is the most obvious NFTs, but they hold some of the most popular memes and like the most popular like images. So be curious what they do with that, whether they become some sort of lifestyle brand or Disney competitor. Like we don't yet know what's there, but they certainly have a following, and it's really cool to see. Um, the other artists, I mean, there's so many incredible artists. I feel like every day I'm finding different artists and people, and I think um, there's kind of I don't know. I tend to feel like there might be a little bit of NFT fatigue in
Mhm.
certain instances. So I think the artists that are able to stay fresh and to stay interesting are certainly going to be the ones that succeed. And the artists that use smart contracts as an artistic medium, are going to be the ones that I think that at least I'm most interested in. I'm not sure whether they'll be the ones that are most popular, but things like Pack, where he uses the contract itself as an artistic medium. So Merge being one of them, where he takes blobs essentially and merges them. Lost Poets, where he has kind of a year long project where he's looking at ways and how he's tying it to his own currency, which is Ash. Of course, those are the coolest ones. So those are the ones that I don't know if they're bullish. Like bullish means that they'll go up in value. But I'm certainly interested in, and those are the ones that I think are really cool. I also really love, I don't know if it got too popular, but I loved the sculpture art blocks NFT, mostly because it was one of the first like kind of 3D NFTs, and I believe it used like WebGL, and it was just a cool, very interesting way to essentially like it was very like very sophisticated in the way that it was using code, and it was very sophisticated in the way that it was taking a 3D object and rendering it and so forth. So I thought that was very cool, just from kind of like a technical perspective. So yeah, that was kind of a bunch of them. I just kind of spit them out. Yeah.
That's great. I also really like Balaji's perspective in the space, and at Akida we are doing like network state study group where we are like going through his lectures and like critically thinking how it will affect the built environment. And I was
Yeah.
thinking like you mentioned about these projects and like metaverse and this decentralized cities. AEC or architects have a big role to play. And I must admit, like I'm really proud and happy to see you like quite active in these projects and gives a lot of inspiration. So, what do you think are like the missed opportunities or like opportunities for us in this space to get more involved and maybe contribute in this decentralized cities development?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk more about the decentralized city development or the metaverse stuff
Both.
or both? I
Yeah.
guess let's start with metaverse, because I think it's such a like kind of dubious, but also such a like vague term. So I'm curious, what have you defined the metaverse to be?
Like I always analyze it from like the 7 layers of metaverse, which is
Yeah.
components of experience, a creator economy in game, and one of other thing I realize is not a lot of metaverse are active, like the urban planning or placemaking principles are have a lot of scope of improvement of people, like make bringing people virtual worlds and experiences together. So I was thinking like maybe we also have a role in like designing those virtual worlds and experiences.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I've certainly seen examples of really good virtual worlds and experiences, and really great non-virtual world and experiences designed without architects.
Hmm.
So, over the past, especially year and a half, but probably over the past 6 or 7 years, a lot of my work was looking at spaces that were not designed by architects or not fully designed by architects, and realizing what those spaces had. So a lot of kind of early work that I did was looking at meditation retreats, and a lot of that is designed not by architects,
Hmm.
kind of by builders. The work that I've been doing with Muse and Company, and it's, if you go online, it's the I think the photos don't give it full justice, but a lot of what Muse and Company is set designers or exhibit designers. I'm actually the only trained architect on the team at Muse and Company, and so I guess the first question I would ask is, uh, do is there really there for architects? In fact, in the past, these metaverses, or the first inklings of metaverses, were designed by game designers,
Mm.
and some of the most incredible games weren't really weren't really designed by architects. So I think, I guess the first question is like, well, um, what is it that architects bring to the metaverse that a game designer or a set designer or someone like that wouldn't necessarily bring? And that's
Mhm.
something that I don't think we yet know. What is the unique value that would have? So I think that's really interesting. And also, like, what is the metaverse? So um, I, I don't think we yet know.
Yep.
And it's certainly not just a game. So maybe in that sense, like when we think about what the metaverse could be, and what architects can bring, one of the good things is that they may bring something slightly different than a game designer, because the metaverse itself is not a game, or not
Mhm.
not fully a game. So I think that's something interesting. I think maybe I can just use my own experiences. There's obviously, when you design VR spaces or you design games, there are these things where you want to toe the line between, kind of like, uh, spaces that you understand and can navigate in, and then spaces that are very cool and different, right? So I
Mhm.
think an architect can, I think maybe, and this is just my own experience, but maybe an architect can actually play that role the best, where they're a translator between these two types of spaces. So, for example, spaces that are real in real life. So, like, they have logical ways of moving through space. So, you have doors, you have entryways, you have, like, in for example, in urban design, you have Kevin Lynch's kind of ideas of how to navigate through space, and you have like paths
Mhm.
and monuments and things like that. Probably similar. There's probably some sort of way in which you have to, in your metaverse or in any kind of VR gaming experience, you have things that are, like beacons, or things that are,
Mhm.
are essentially grounding elements. So maybe an architect is probably better at that, because they can understand how people navigate through spaces and have a deep understanding of the user experience. That might be something. And then on the other hand, you have this other balance, and I'm totally making this up right now, by the way. So just bear with me. And on the other side, you have like this, like, what are the most amazing, wild ideas you can do? And I think that's where, like, game designers or set
Mhm.
designers are a little bit more strong, where they, or artists, for example, they're really looking at, like, what are the craziest ideas we could do? Like, you know, just because, for example, like, just because um, you have to do a conference with someone in a room in VR or whatever. That's like one of the examples that Meta has. Um, that conference doesn't have to be in a lame conference room. Like, the
Mhm.
idea that, the metaverse allows you to, essentially create these magical or inspiring worlds, or at least the VR version of the metaverse, or the 3D spatial version of the metaverse. There's this idea of narrative that you can create. You can essentially create these incredibly interesting worlds, and you see that with things like Meow Wolf, in physical space, where you see really amazing narrative driven worlds. And so I guess, like, and in game design, you see these really amazing narrative driven worlds. So you're kind of bringing in game design, and then you're also bringing in these affordances. Like, you have to think about, like, in VR, like, how do you open a door? Like, do you need to open a door? Like, and maybe you need something that's not so
Mm.
Thanks, guys. Need to open a door. So anyway, those are like the random two worlds. I also think we don't really yet know what the metaverse is. So architects helping in defining that, with the fact that they know all this context, with the fact that they, have all this training, and it's got to be useful for something, right? All this work on, like the primitive hut and like all these like different architects that we have in
Mm.
our back mind,
Yeah.
and like different examples of spaces and how light. I think, one of the craziest things, I think architects have a better sense of like how to use light, and materials, and that's really like, that's really, and like spatial awareness. So those are the three things that I think architects bring in. I think exhibit designers, kind of bring in this idea of like narrative and
Mhm.
storytelling, and how to create things with cheaper things. So, architects bring in this idea of like, the truth of materials, whereas exhibit designers can make something look like something else. So like this painted brick isn't painted brick, it's just like paper. And then artists bring in this idea of like, they bring in this other completely different world, and industrial designers bring in this completely different world where they're really on this kind of like, how do we solve everyday problems. So you have like exhibit designers, you have, artists, you have industrial designers, you have architects, you have game designers. I think everybody is probably going to be really useful in the future of the metaverse, whatever it ends up being. Um, I actually don't think the metaverse is purely like a VR or AR, situation. You
Mhm.
spoke about some sort of 7 layer thing. I don't know what that is, but I'm curious to learn more about that. I think especially when you start to bring in people that maybe, it sounds crazy, but not everyone plays video games. So if you want to bring more and more people onto this like wider metaverse experience, the navigations and the way in which they experience this world have to be very similar, to how they experience in real life, at least initially. Um, so I think that's another way where architects can bring in some really interesting stuff. So providing context, providing like a deep understanding of how people navigate through space. Those are all things that I think are really important. Um, on a slight
We,
segue, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just
I
thinking
could talk
like,
about this forever.
no, like on the same point, I was thinking like there's also no clear guideline on like accessibility in metaverse. What does that look like, or what are the standards for that? So.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think partially it's because we don't really have like like we don't know what, the metaverse is. I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about accessibility already. Like we should absolutely think about how people navigate through space, especially people that get disoriented. Like VR is not for everyone, even when it's at a, at some hypothetical magical 10 years from now, which by the way is always 10 years from now. Um, we had like just like, it was funny, when I'll take away the names, but one of the wildest experiences I had at this like, stealth Google lab was we had a very famous early scientist come into the lab, and we outfitted them with like a headgear and everything, and we put everything in there, and basically they're like in this, VR simulation, and they turn to us and say, oh, this is kind of like the 60s, like this, I was doing this in the 60s, and and you realize that like, the headsets and VR are actually part of this really long history. Anyway, that was a segue, to the. I totally forgot the question, so you'll have to re-answer.
No, I was just you had another point earlier, but I was just talking about accessibility in metaverse.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think definitely like just because the metaverse isn't defined yet doesn't mean that we don't think about how to make it accessible for everybody. Because in fact, that its success is predicated on the fact that there's wide adoption. So, if it's something that is, not accessible, whether from a cost perspective or from a usage perspective, then it's not really going to be successful. I have a suspicion that the metaverse is going to be it's kind of like, defining the metaverse right now is like defining the internet in the 80s. Like,
Yeah.
no, there's probably going to be something for everybody, and it's probably not yet fully defined. But I think I have a suspicion that the metaverse won't be like in an ideal world, it won't be like a single thing. It will be like it will be like the connection of things. So, two experiences I've had that gave me a better glimpse in what the metaverse could be was obviously Meow Wolf, going to Meow Wolf Denver and then Meow Wolf to Meow Wolf Vegas, and just understanding how they're thinking through space, and how they're using these systems to essentially connect, like very basic, like scanning kind of things. And you would scan something and it would get an image. It's really worth taking a look as an architect and as a designer of spaces. Um, and then the other thing that I thought was really interesting, although I feel like that this project maybe hasn't gone the way that it wanted, which honestly, like, my fault for trusting like a pseudonymous teenager to run $100+ million project. But
Wow.
it was Temple DAO, and the work that Temple DAO did, bringing, I think they were using, you correct me wrong. I think they weren't using decentralized land, but they were using crypto voxels, and basically their entire, at least initially, was this like very confusing like set of tasks you had to do in order to get into the early buyout of
Yeah.
Temple. And obviously I did it, and I spent many hours and then bought it at the height, and then it completely crashed. Lost money. But the whole thing was really interesting in a sense that it was like the connection of, you had, you're connecting like Discord, and then you were connecting this crypto voxels thing, and then you were connecting like these contracts for essentially what they were
Mhm.
doing, kind of this ohm, like an ohm, a version of an ohm
Oh,
3.3 kind
yeah.
of mechanism. But obviously they've changed that since then. But I thought that was really cool in the sense that it wasn't just 3D spatial experiences. It was like you had to do something in other platforms, and the beauty was in how they connected all these different
Hmm.
disparate platforms. And I thought, that was really cool, because that was like, oh, that could be the metaverse. That's more metaverse than this like single, it's a game, or it's like, some lame ass avatars around a conference room. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that will be really cool. Like, the openness of the metaverse is going to make it really interesting if we are allowed to have these openness. And I think you speak about that a lot with interoperability and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and I think that's a great segue. Like one of the thing I really wanted to know your thoughts on climate and crypto and tech, and you mentioned about OhmDAO fork. I know KlimaDAO was doing something on carbon credits. So, like, what are your thoughts on how we can use this technology for the climate?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's still really nascent technology, and we have I don't know if we'll be able to use it fully to solve what is essentially a climate crisis. I speak to a few friends that are a little bit less like afraid of the climate crisis, which is really interesting. I think, a lot of it is this like layer of doom and gloom. And I think if we actively challenge that, like, I really hate this like layer of doom and gloom, because it paralyzes a lot of people. It doesn't mean that these problems are not important, but this
Mhm.
idea of doom and gloom is really, really lame. So I think, at least at the very least, a lot of crypto, at least initially, has this kind of optimistic layer. So at the very least, one of the things that could lend itself is at the very least like saying that it's possible to solve this problem. I don't know where it could go. Like, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like the current problem at hand with climate is so pressing that we're not yet there with this technology to be able to address it. With that said, there are some interesting things, namely this idea of global coordination, and this
Mhm.
idea where you have these new ways of incentivizing people. So climate is obviously one of these, looking at ways to incentivize carbon purchasing and what it means in that market. I think one of the coolest books, and if anyone's interested in climate, there's obviously a ton of these really cool books to read. You've got Charles Eisenstein and that like contingent of worlds. But one of the coolest books I read recently was Saul Griffith, and
Mhm.
it's called Electrify. And he's kind of a whizzy, incredible guy, founder of Makani Power. He basically, one of the cool things that he mentioned was really this idea that like honestly it's all about like electrifying things. Like once we
Mhm.
get to a point where just electrifying the most basic things, like namely our cars, and like heat pumps and like our homes, like if we start to do that, we're like 80% there. Like, and the
Yeah.
idea was like, if we just electrify things and if we electrify our demand and then we electrify our supply, like the idea is that we're back on that. Like, remember when we first started the
Mhm.
simple to complex simple, we're back at the end of the simple where you like, and I think like, you know, I don't know how crypto can feed into that. Certainly
Mhm.
maybe crypto can feed into it with regards to a bringing this optimism, and B, bringing in new ways of incentivizing these sort of things. So obviously, financing things like EV purchases, or financing things like having photovoltaic cells, or installing a new heat pump. Those are real problems.
Mhm.
Those are problems that can be solved by some governments. But there is probably mechanisms where you're incentivized by some sort of currency to buy these, or you buy them with this currency. It would be really cool if you could buy not you could buy the stuff. I know that at some point Tesla was allowing people to buy with crypto their cars. I think that's actually kind of interesting, in that way. So this was very like roundabout way of saying that it's probably not there yet to solve um, all the climate problems, or at least not where it is right now. But there's certainly some interesting ones with regards to incentive design that will be really cool to see. And hopefully, we have enough time. And now back to doom and gloom. Hopefully, we have enough time to be able to see those come to
Mhm.
fruition. But yeah, it's really about electrifying things. It's really not as crazy hard as maybe we think it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, I really like resonate with that point because like one of the experiment we are doing is like how can like sustainable behavior can be tied to
Yeah.
smart contracts and like lifestyle. So like we are doing some like IoT and energy data collection combined with building credits and some. Let's see how it goes. But speaking
Yeah.
of buying things, uh, I'm curious to know your thoughts on like crypto and real estate. I know people are doing tokenization of real estate, shared ownership, stuff like that. What are your thoughts?
Oh, God, real estate. I mean, uh, I, I I could talk a little bit about it. I think one of the craziest problems we're seeing now is this crazy like tying of your home to your main source of wealth.
Mhm.
So I mean, there's obviously a bunch of things to talk about, like tokenization of real estate, or like buying real estate with crypto. Those are cool. Those are great. But I mean, the real problem we're having is like we don't have enough supply of housing, And then the problem behind that problem, at least that I see, is that we we've we've essentially made it okay to assume that someone's main source of wealth generation is the appreciation of their home value. Like
Mhm.
that wasn't always the norm, right? Like the fact that you buy your home and it's like a financial asset is actually really weird when you think about it. And there's nothing stopping, at least in major metropolitan areas, the price of housing continuously increases to the point where it's not accessible to most people. And that is actually a pretty huge problem. And I don't know how we might solve that. There's probably ways in which crypto, at least initial, like simple ways that crypto could help solve, whether that's like using it to issue, like maybe there's a way in which you have partial ownership to certain, like you're partially own you have a partial ownership to a house, and maybe it's some sort of like timeshare mechanism
Mhm.
that is enabled by crypto. Those are cool, but they still don't get at the very core, which is kind of this big problem we're seeing with regards to home prices. And even as interest rates start to increase, home prices still are massively high. And that is there. I don't know what we're kind of at this really weird world where we've consistently lowered our interest rates down, and we've actually had inflation, which was asset
Mhm.
inflation, and now we're having more inflation. So I think we're in so much that maybe it points to different ways of, like, different forms of economic, like different ways of structuring economy. Like, yeah, there's probably like a bunch of small real estate plays to be done in crypto that are interesting. There's certainly a lot of startups that are looking at ways, because housing is so obviously expensive. They're looking at ways to enable people to split housing. So, like, you and I buy a house and your family like lives in the top floor, my family lives in the bottom floor, and we own this house together. There's like these kind of mechanisms. There's a bunch of the cool startups that are doing that. And I think, like, yeah, crypto can definitely be maybe one of these kind of mechanisms. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily something that I'm purely interested in. Like,
Mhm.
I think there's the real meat of it is, are there ways in which we could stop this sort of increase in housing prices, or incentivize an increase in supply. um, but yeah, it's a whole thing. I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered that question. I kind of just waxed on poetically and complained. So
No, I love it. You are like sharing, going with the flow with your thoughts and like sharing all the insights. And I was wondering about this the other day. Like a lot of like NFT application became quite popular by cutting the middleman for music, for artists. So I was wondering if the owner cuts the like sales broker or developer and like directly bills with a contractor. That could be
yeah,
one. Even like data, like data ownership, like people are integrating iota devices where building performance, air pollution data, they're sending it to various protocols and getting money for that. So
yeah,
that
I
could.
think it could be really cool. I think anything, um, you know, real estate brokers do quite a bit of work with regards to securing contracts and things like that. So maybe there's ways to do that. I was looking, a few of my friends are looking at ways to essentially, every municipality has data on the house, right? So every municipality has their own databases and they don't act within each other. So are there applications of blockchain that would smooth that out? Not too sure. loan underwriting.
Mhm.
So you get a mortgage. There's quite a bit that goes into that. So are there ways to essentially write like crypto, like write these kind of loans in crypto and use those instead. There's so much. Like there's obviously this is a nascent technology, and so there's so much out there, and of course people are really looking at it right now in really interesting ways. Obviously, the off ramp on ramp problem still exists, and KYC and all that jazz. So we'll see where that lands.
Even the regulations, yeah, currently.
Yeah,
I so we know that you're active in Muse, crypto, writing cool tweets. How do you manage your time? Like, how does a day in your life look like?
very poorly. um, I manage my time poorly. That's the overarching kind of thing, and I have a lot of problems with priorities. I That's all I could say. Like I sleep well. Like I do that. I think um,
After
uh,
architecture school?
yeah. Gosh, architecture school really needs an overhaul, huh? Um, yeah, I think uh, I'm very lucky because it looks like I'm doing more than I do because I am working with such brilliant people. That I think there's a hack. There's like the like successful people have a hack where it's kind of this like tip of the iceberg and you see this one person, but there's actually like dozens of other people that are working together, and the sum the sum of everybody working together is greater than the parts, right? So I guess my answer is poorly, and I'm not doing it alone. Yeah.
Maybe walk us how a day in your life look like.
Oh my God. Every day is different, I guess. I do a lot of work at Music Company, and a lot of it is like management and project management, and you know, it's all sounds pretty glamorous, but you're like at 8 p.m. doing like changes on a slide deck, or you're calling like the drywall guy because you need him to do something. So like I think every day is different. So I absolutely do not wake up and meditate and drink green juice, which I think would be great, but I don't. But I think the thing that I do like I do is I have time to contemplate bigger things at the day, and then I have time to do the minutia. And I'm very lucky that I get to do both. And I think that is actually one of the cool things about architecture is that you are able to dive into the minutia of every day, but you're also able to think the big picture. So I say every day is different. I do some news stuff. I answer a lot of emails. Um, and then I have time for some level of contemplation. So I'm very lucky. I don't have kids yet. I feel like that will change once I have kids. So there's a preface, like for everyone that has kids, like I have no idea how you do it, and I'm terrified to learn, but I'll be there. I'll join the club soon enough, and then I'll be calling you guys.
I see. And if you were to do a AC tech startup and you wanna hire 6 members in your dream team, who would that be?
Paul, Paul from Arkle. I would just give him the reins. AAC technology. Well, it depends on what it is, right? And so it depends on what it's doing, and what field it is. So there's obviously expertise there. I think the folks from Hypar and Paul are definitely the strong folks in software. I think the world of the operators at CabinDAO, I think they're just some of the most solid folks in the world. There's probably a bunch of people that are very famous on Twitter, on LinkedIn, that are probably good hires as well that I would try to poach. I just don't know them personally, so I can't really talk to that. You know, friends like Julian Weiser from On Deck, probably the best in terms of like an empathetic leader. So empathy and leadership. I have just been name dropping folks. I don't know.
We had six people,
So
but you, okay.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. Like, it really depends on folks. If I'm very lucky, I hire on a good team and like kind of just do hiring and funding and like set the
Mhm.
culture, which would be the greatest CEO job, and not not dabble in the minutia. But so yeah, I mean, there's no. I would also probably hire, to be quite honest, like folks that are really smart in architecture but haven't yet broken into tech.
Mm.
So a big thing of my big shtick of mine, as someone that has kind of dabbled in both, and I'm kind of in tech but not really, and kind of in architecture but not really. Um, I think the biggest thing, and I keep seeing it with like, job postings, is like, oh my God, like people need to just think a little bit outside the box when they're hiring people, especially now with regards to this like hiring crisis that we're
Yeah.
seeing. So I guess the other folks that I would hire are just people that aren't tech people, people that are interested in tech and want to break into it. I would probably hire those folks. There's probably a ton of the Revit masters or BIM
Mhm.
masters that are just like a hop, skip, and a jump away from being software developers. So
Yeah.
I would probably hire them at a lot cheaper rate than the software developers you get today, and train them up. So that would be one of the strategies, is a healthy amount of software developers that are ex architects.
Wanna make a change.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
it's amazing. What will be your advice to your younger self?
Oh my God, I don't know. What's my advice to my future self, and my younger self? I don't know. Gosh, like I had no idea what I was doing. I still have no idea what I'm doing. And like living an examined, interesting life is a constant job, or a like constantly requires effort. I don't know if I have advice. What have people said in the past? Have people said stuff in the past in your other interviews?
Yeah, like there are
Yeah.
various things. Maybe I'll frame it differently. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
No.
No? Okay.
No. If I did, then I would have been a different person. So I guess that's like, no, I don't have anything. Just keep going. Like, I guess that's my advice, is just keep going. Yeah. Sorry, that
All
was probably not the greatest.
right. I'll wrap up the interview with a rapid fire. So you'll have
Right.
10 to 15 seconds to answer it, and you gotta keep it very brief.
Awesome.
All
Underrated.
right. Okay. Which city is in your travel bucket list?
Which city? Oh gosh, rapid fire. Istanbul, Constantinople. Love to go to Turkey.
Who's your role model?
Role model. Oh my gosh. Ah, role models. I'm like totally spacing out. I think like honestly, my friends, and like my colleagues, role models, people that are a few years ahead, are big role models.
Any technical or business book which made a big impact in your life?
Pyramid Principle. So it's a book on how to write well.
Your favorite movie?
My favorite movie. Oh my God. Almost Famous. kind of like a cult hit with Kate Hudson. Yeah, I'll use that one. I like a lot of movies.
Restaurant.
Oh gosh. I just went to a cool restaurant in Denver called Bruto. And the whole idea was that it's a really small space, and then you are looking at people making food.
Oh, I see.
It's cool. It's a little bougie. Like it's definitely like a little bougie.
Yeah. What are your hobbies?
I don't have any hobbies, and this is a huge problem. I literally like I think about that every day. Angel investing is not a hobby. I would say so. I actually recently got into like these. They're called hang drums. So if you've ever seen kind of a drum and it makes like really kind of vibey music, so I've gotten into that. That's my hobby, I guess. Yoga, but like the California version of yoga, which is like, you go once every few weeks and you call yourself a yogi. So those are my hobbies. I don't have I need to have. This is probably where, how do you make sure you have like remember the previous question you had, which was like, how do you fit all this stuff in the day? It's like I honestly don't have hobbies. So maybe that's something to think about.
Mm. Okay. Uh, are you a mountain person or a beach person?
I am both because I got to grow up in Vancouver, and that allowed me to be both.
Okay. Next segment is you got to answer bullish or bearish. So,
Perfect.
okay.
Yes, I love this.
AI in AEC,
Bearish.
metaverse in architecture.
Bearish.
Okay. Uh, blockchain in AEC.
Bearish. Wow, I'm really depressing here.
Generative design in AEC.
Generative design. Oh, bearish. Gosh. Okay. Yeah. Let's. All right. Keep going.
Open
Cautious.
source.
Cautiously bearish.
Open source development in AEC.
Bullish. That one I'm pretty bullish on, actually.
Okay. Lastly, like, is there anything which we didn't discuss in this interview and you like to share?
No, this has been so great. I mean, I've been kind of all over the place, Mayur, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface. I'm sure we'll chat more, and yeah, if you have any other questions, I know I kind of darted from one concept to another and tried to jam in a bunch of stuff on a very kind of superficial level. So yeah, if there's other things we want to chat about more, I'm happy to come back, or we can chat over a drink or coffee. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good time to be in Chicago. So, I mean,
right. At the end of the winter, it's a very good time to be in Chicago.
nice. One thing I wanted to discuss, like a lot of the viewers are computational designer, AEC tech, and software developers. Are there any opportunities or at Spatial Syndicate, or how to reach out to you if they have a startup idea?
Absolutely. I think I'm the most active on Twitter, so I think my DMs are open, so feel free to DM me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Although I've had people reach out on LinkedIn, uh, which is crazy. But yeah, let's do Twitter.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kat, for like sharing ideas. It was very like provocative, and we got a spectrum of things we need to think about and the opportunities ahead. So it was
Yeah.
great hosting you.
It was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. See you. Have a nice day.
All right.